It was the late autumn of 1872 when the wind blew across the open plains of Montana, carrying with it the scent of fading grass and the sharp bite of an early frost, a season when the cattle grew restless and the nights grew longer, and in that season a cowboy named Elijah Carter lived alone on a rugged patch of land where he raised horses, tended to cattle, and worked tirelessly to build a life away from the noise of the growing towns. Elijah was a man hardened by years on the trail, yet not without a heart, for beneath his weather-worn face and calloused hands there remained the memory of kindness passed down from his mother, who had always told him that no matter how rough the world became, a man's worth was measured not by the wealth he stored but by the mercy he gave. It was on one such evening, when Elijah was bringing in his last horse to the barn, that he noticed a faint figure stumbling near the edge of his property. At first, he thought it was a trick of the dusk light, but as he came closer he realized it was a child, thin and frail, clothed in torn deerskin, his dark hair tangled, his small feet cut from the rough earth. The boy collapsed just beyond the corral fence, and Elijah, startled, rushed forward, kneeling beside him. The boy's lips were cracked, his eyes hollow with hunger, his body trembling from exhaustion. Elijah lifted him gently, carried him inside, and laid him by the fireplace. He gave him water first, then a small piece of bread softened in milk so it would not choke him, and as the boy ate slowly, Elijah could see just how near to death he had been. The boy spoke little at first, only a few words in broken English, enough for Elijah to understand that he had not eaten in days, that he had been separated from his people, and that he had wandered lost and starving across the prairie. Elijah did not ask too many questions that night, he simply tended to him the way one tends to a lost colt, with patience and quiet reassurance. He wrapped him in a wool blanket and let him sleep while the fire warmed his small, shivering body. That night, Elijah sat by the fire himself, watching the flames flicker against the boy's fragile frame, and he thought of how the land was changing, how ranchers and settlers moved deeper into territories once walked freely by the native tribes. Tensions had grown high in those years. Many cowboys would have turned the boy away, fearing trouble if the tribe learned he had taken one of their own. But Elijah could not bring himself to harden his heart. He knew the boy's people might never know what had become of him if he died alone on the plains. He also knew that saving him might invite danger to his door. Still, when he looked upon the boy, he remembered his own younger brother, who had died during a harsh winter years ago because no one had been there to help. Elijah swore that if he could prevent another child from meeting that fate, he would, regardless of the risk. At dawn, the boy stirred, his eyes clearer than before, though still shadowed by hunger. Elijah introduced himself slowly, pointing to his own chest, saying, "Elijah." The boy tried to mimic, but his voice was weak, and he whispered instead a name that sounded like, Tahu. Elijah repeated it, nodding with respect. Over the next hours, Elijah gave him more food, beans, cornbread, dried venison, and the boy ate like someone who had forgotten what it meant to be full. For the first time in days, he smiled faintly, though his eyes still held the haunted look of someone who had endured too much for his age. Elijah showed him the barn, the horses, the chickens pecking in the dirt, hoping to give him some sense of comfort. The boy's eyes lit up at the sight of the horses. He reached out, hesitant, until Elijah placed his hand gently on the mane of a calm mare. For a moment, Elijah saw wonder return to his face, a glimpse of the child he truly was beneath the hunger and exhaustion. By evening, Elijah had decided the boy would stay with him until he regained his strength. He did not know what would come of it, but he felt it was the right thing to do. He fixed a small cot in the corner of his cabin, gave the boy a clean shirt, and taught him how to wash up at the pump outside. Slowly, they began to communicate with gestures and simple words. Elijah learned that Tahu's family had been forced to move after soldiers raided their camp, that in the confusion he had become separated, and that he had wandered days without food. The pain in his voice, though broken, was clear enough. Elijah felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of a child suffering for conflicts he did not create. That night, as the wind howled outside and coyotes cried in the distance, Elijah reassured the boy with a steady hand and a calm voice, promising he was safe here. What Elijah did not know was that beyond the horizon, far across the rolling plains, Tahu's people searched for him, hearts heavy with grief, believing perhaps he had perished in the wilderness. Nor did Elijah know that his act of kindness would soon draw them to his land, not with vengeance but with a force of gratitude he could never have imagined. The next morning came crisp and cold, the sky painted in shades of rose and gold. Elijah saddled his horse to check the far pasture, and when he turned back, he saw Tahu following him timidly, clutching the blanket around his shoulders. Elijah smiled and lifted him onto the horse, letting him ride in front. They rode slowly, the wind brushing against their faces, and Elijah told him the names of the hills and streams, pointing to deer tracks in the frost, teaching him the ways of the land as he had learned them. Tahu listened intently, his small hands gripping the saddle horn, his eyes soaking in every word. For a boy who had lost so much, this moment felt like the return of hope. By the time they returned to the barn, Tahu's laughter, soft but real, echoed across the empty prairie, a sound Elijah had not expected to hear so soon. He felt a warmth in his chest, the kind that reminded him why kindness was worth the risk. That night, as Elijah sat whittling wood by the fire, Tahu curled up with the blanket, already drifting into dreams, safe at last. Elijah thought of the days ahead, of what he might need to do if someone came looking for the boy, but he brushed the worry aside for the moment. For now, all that mattered was that he had saved a life. The future could wait until morning. But the prairie has a way of carrying news silently, in whispers carried by the wind, in tracks left behind unnoticed, in eyes watching from a distance. What Elijah did not see was that as he rode with Tahu that morning, a group of scouts far off on the ridge had spotted them. They rode hard back to their camp to deliver the news. The lost boy had been found, alive, and in the care of a cowboy. By the time Elijah and Tahu slept that night, fires were being lit in a distant valley, and warriors prepared to ride would meet, forever changing his life. The morning sun rose pale against the horizon, spilling a silver glow across the prairie grass, and Elijah awoke to the restless stamping of his horses in the barn, their nerves betraying a disturbance he could not yet see. At first he thought perhaps it was wolves prowling nearby, but when he stepped outside, rifle in hand, his breath caught in his chest, for across the field, stretching like a river of fire and shadow, stood 200 native warriors mounted on painted horses, feathers streaming in the wind, their faces solemn and proud as they filled the ridge above his land. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying, for Elijah had never before seen so many gathered together, their silence heavier than any battle cry. His first instinct was fear, a natural surge that told him he had perhaps made a mistake in taking the boy in, but before he could move, Tahu emerged from the cabin, his blanket trailing behind him, his small eyes widening at the sight of his people. The boy let out a cry, a word in his native tongue, and the sound carried across the field like a spark leaping from dry wood. At once, the warriors stirred, their voices rising in relief, for the child they had mourned as lost was alive and safe. Elijah lowered his rifle slowly, realizing this was not a gathering of vengeance but of gratitude, though the sheer size of it set his heart racing. Within moments, a group of elders rode forward, dismounting with dignity, their eyes fixed on Tahu. The boy ran to them, stumbling across the dirt, and they embraced him tightly, tears streaming down their weathered faces, their voices breaking with joy. Elijah watched from a distance, his chest tightening as he realized just how much this boy meant to them. He had not simply saved a starving child, he had restored hope to an entire people. But the story did not end with reunion, for after their tears and embraces, the elders turned to Elijah. The warriors remained mounted, their expressions cautious but not hostile, their hands resting near their weapons as if uncertain what might come. Elijah stood tall, though his heart pounded, his hands open to show he meant no harm. One of the elders, a man with long gray braids and eyes like polished stone, stepped forward. He spoke first in his own language, words Elijah could not understand, then switched to broken English, enough for Elijah to hear. "You found our son. You gave him life." Elijah nodded humbly, answering, "He was hungry. He was cold. I could not let him die." The elder studied him for a long moment, then nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of honor. Tahu, standing between them, clutched Elijah's hand and spoke quickly in his tongue, his voice urgent but full of trust. Though Elijah could not understand, he knew the boy was telling them what had been done, how he had been fed, warmed, and cared for when death was near. The warriors shifted in their saddles, murmuring among themselves, their gazes softening. Gratitude, it seemed, was stronger than suspicion. Then something unexpected happened. The elder gestured, and from the line of warriors came riders leading horses, strong and proud, their coats painted with tribal markings. They brought them forward, stopping before Elijah's barn. The elder pointed to the horses, saying in halting words, "Gift. For you." Elijah blinked, stunned, for he had never expected anything in return. He had acted out of simple mercy, not for reward, yet here stood 200 warriors offering him the highest honor they could: horses, wealth upon the plains, symbols of respect. Elijah shook his head at first, trying to refuse, saying quietly, "I need no gift. His life is enough." But the elder raised a hand firmly. "You accept," he said. "If you do not, we cannot rest. The boy lives. Because of you. We must honor this." Elijah hesitated, then bowed his head in agreement, accepting their gratitude not as riches but as bond between men who had once been strangers. He placed his hand on the mane of the lead horse, nodding his thanks. A ripple of relief passed through the warriors, and for the first time, many of them smiled. Tahu beamed up at him, his small hand still holding tight to Elijah's, as if bridging two worlds that rarely touched without bloodshed. The hours that followed were unlike anything Elijah had ever known. The warriors dismounted and made camp nearby, building fires, singing songs that rose like echoes against the mountains. Women appeared too, riding in later with supplies, and the air was filled with laughter, drumming, and the scent of roasted meat. Tahu remained close to Elijah, leading him among his people, introducing him with words Elijah could not understand but gestures that spoke volumes. Wherever he went, warriors and mothers and children touched Elijah's arm, bowed their heads, or spoke soft words of thanks. He realized that what he had done for one starving child had healed a wound far larger than he had imagined. By showing mercy without fear, he had crossed a line no treaty had ever managed to hold. For one day, on that patch of land, Cowboy and tribe lived as kin. Elijah felt something stir deep within him, a sense of belonging that had long eluded him in his solitary life. For so many years he had worked the land alone, speaking only to his horses and cattle, carrying silence as his only companion. But now he felt surrounded by life, by people who valued honor above wealth, family above pride. He saw in their eyes the reflection of his own loneliness and the answer to it. As night fell, the elder came to him again, bringing Tahu along. The elder sat by Elijah's fire, his voice low but steady. "The world is changing," he said slowly in English, his words strained but clear. "Our people, your people, many times, they fight. Many times, they kill. But tonight, no fight. Tonight, one boy lives. That is more strong than war." Elijah listened, nodding, feeling the truth of the words. He thought of all the hatred that brewed between settlers and natives, the endless circle of raids and reprisals, the fear that drove men to see enemies instead of neighbors. And here, with nothing but kindness and courage, that cycle had been broken, at least for a night. Elijah answered quietly, "If more men cared for children instead of land and guns, maybe we'd all live better." The elder studied him, then placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of respect that needed no translation. When he rose to leave, Tahu lingered, hugging Elijah tightly before returning to his family's side. Elijah watched him go, a lump in his throat, realizing he might never see the boy again but knowing his life would never be the same for having saved him. The warriors departed at dawn, their line stretching across the horizon like a living river, their songs echoing long after they were gone. They left behind not just the horses but a memory Elijah would carry forever. As he stood alone again by his barn, the silence felt different, not empty, but full of meaning. He knew that word of what had happened would spread, that some settlers might mock him for helping, others might envy the horses he had been gifted, and still others might accuse him of betrayal. But none of that mattered, for he had looked into the eyes of 200 warriors and seen gratitude where there might have been rage. He had given life where there might have been death. That was enough. And though his days ahead would be hard, Elijah felt a peace he had not known in years. And to those who hear this story now, who walk in a world still divided by fear, suspicion, and pride, remember the lesson of Elijah and Tahu, that one act of mercy can change more than a life, it can change hearts, it can change the course of a people. If a cowboy on the edge of the plains could find courage to help a starving child, then surely each of us can find it within ourselves to show kindness when it is needed most. And if this story has touched you, if it has reminded you of the power of compassion in a hard world, then stay with us, join this journey, and subscribe to our channel so we can share more stories that remind us all of what it means to be human. Your support keeps these stories alive, and together we can carry forward the spirit of mercy that turned fear into gratitude and strangers into kin beneath the wide and endless sky.